Over the past several years, I've increasingly found the urge to always be doing something productive. Maybe it was studying or doing homework or just cleaning the apartment, but generally as long as I wasn't sitting idle, I was content. But despite feeling good about how productive I thought I was being, I also realized that I wasn't getting everything done that I wanted to. I'd end the day thinking about how long I'd work, but I'd also think about all the things that I wasn't able to get done, and eventually I just resigned myself to the fact that there weren't enough hours in the day to get done everything I wanted to do. My breakthrough, as you can probably guess from the title of this video, came from shifting my perspective of productivity, and at the most simple level this can be boiled down to the statement, busy does not equal productive. The Oxford definition of productive is something like producing or able to produce large amounts of goods, crops, or other commodities. The reason I think this definition is interesting is because it makes no reference to how hard you work or how long you work. It only actually references the end product of what you're actually able to achieve. In other words, it's not always a matter of working harder, sometimes it's just a matter of working smarter. For example, if I decide to spend 16 hours working on a project and someone else only spends 2 hours on it, that does not necessarily mean that my project will perform better. All that really tells us is that I spent 14 more hours working on my project than the other person did. Now, given that you do a little bit of planning before you actually start that project, I'm hoping that the person who spent 16 hours on it could actually do a little bit better than the person who spent 2 hours on it, but the truth is that isn't always the case. When I was doing the planning for this video, this reminded me of a programming competition I went to in high school where one of the problems required you to select one of a finite number of possibilities depending on a set of conditions. The quicker and arguably correct solution determined an algorithm that could figure out what the correct choice was and was pretty simple to implement. Unfortunately, on the other hand, there was the longer solution, which is what my team ended up implementing, that required them to hard-code in every single one of the possibilities. And ultimately, other than a few bugs that resulted from copy-pasting lines and forgetting to change them, this solution worked. But it was no more productive or better to do this solution that took an hour and a half versus the solution that probably only took 20 minutes if the team had taken the time to figure out the algorithm from the beginning. Obviously, that's just one silly example, but once I took a step back and actually looked at my own life, I began to see more and more things that were taking up my time that weren't actually serving any significant purpose. My desire to constantly fill my time instead of prioritizing what I really wanted to do meant that I no longer had the time to pursue any of the other things in my life that I actually wanted to do. Before I keep going, I also want to note that the point of this video is not to tell you that you should always be doing something productive. In fact, I actually made a video last year talking about making the most of your college experience after it became apparent due to the restrictions because of the pandemic that a lot of the things I had said I wanted to do eventually in college would probably never happen at all. A lot of those things that I'd hoped or planned to do in college were actually things I'd had the opportunity to do in my first 3 years, and I'd ultimately decided not to do them because I thought I was too busy and I just couldn't allocate the time. The truth is, the core issue actually has nothing to do with productivity, although it's generally closely tied to it in my life, and it's that we're not being intentional enough with our time. What this means is, even if you don't choose to spend your time working as effectively as possible to produce the largest amount of goods, as that definition for productivity would say, you're actively deciding what is most important to you, and you're doing that. Here's an exercise for those of you who like these sorts of things. Instead of proactively planning out an idealistic schedule for yourself for the upcoming days, instead just follow your normal routine and retroactively keep track of how you're actually spending your time. First, in order for this to be effective, you need to do this right after the day ends, whether it be that night or the next morning. After a week goes by, you won't remember what you actually did. All you'll remember is the things that you thought you did without all the other insignificant bits in there, which in fact is the whole point of this exercise. If you're someone who's ever kept a food diary, this whole concept is probably pretty familiar to you. Second, you need to be completely honest with yourself for this to work. If you spent an hour scrolling through Instagram, even if you don't want to admit that, you need to say that you spent an hour scrolling through Instagram. In our heads, it's easy to try to downplay or justify the things that we're not happy with or proud of in our lives to make ourselves feel better. The issue is, this isn't actually recognizing our faults or fixing the problem in any way. This is more like just sweeping things under the rug in an attempt to forget about it. If you actually do try this exercise, what you'll probably find is that you're wasting more time than you realize, whether that's just through busy work, sitting on your phone, scrolling through social media, or anything else that you spend your time doing throughout the day. Depending on who you are, maybe this doesn't bother you, but if you're someone who's been wanting to start that project or join that club and you haven't felt like you have time, what this reveals is that we actually have a large chunk of time that we're just wasting every single day, and we need to find a way to be able to take advantage of it. In the past year, I made over 60 videos for this YouTube channel, and I finally finished an iOS app for the first time in 3.5 years. I didn't take any less credits in college, and I was able to maintain my grades, and I was also someone who was fortunate enough to be able to keep their internship despite the pandemic. What it really came down to was that I wouldn't be able to do any of these things unless I was being more intentional with my time. I realized that instead of sitting around doing busy work, I needed to allocate that time towards the things that I really wanted to do, otherwise they just weren't gonna get done. The reason I decided to make this video now is because we just started a new year, and with that comes a lot of resolutions for new behaviors to try to help us to achieve the things that we haven't really prioritized in the past. I've seen estimates that about 80% of New Year's resolutions fall apart by February, and in a lot of cases that's just because we don't think we have enough time to meet the goals that we set for ourselves in the previous year. Before you sink into this trap and let another year go by without making any changes, focus on the things in your life that you're doing and ask yourself whether you're doing the things that are really important to you or whether you're just filling your time with stuff. Now, realistically, it probably won't happen overnight. It's hard to pick up new tendencies and habits, and it's much easier to stay in these same cycles that we're accustomed to, but progress takes time, and if you're willing to work for it, you will make progress. I've said it before and I'll say it again. We all get the same 24 hours in the day. If you didn't find time to do it in 2020, unless you're willing to make some changes, you're not going to find time to do it in 2021. Make sure you take a step back, look at how you're spending your time, and then be intentional about it. Alright guys, if you found that video helpful, please hit the thumbs up button. I really do appreciate it. And if you're new here, consider subscribing for new videos every single week. That's it. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you guys in the next one.